It's been a few weeks, but we are talking about Jesus, the rest of the story. If you remember Paul Harvey's radio program, that's kind of where we get the idea. We get to hear the rest of Jesus' story. Up until this point, we have seen Jesus as the Lamb of God slain from the foundation of the world. But as we've been going through this study of Revelation, and the letters in particular to these churches, we are now seeing Christ as the conquering king, the ruler of all. And tonight, he has written the letter to the church at Pergamos, and that is what we're going to be studying. So let's read it. We're in Revelation chapter 2. We're going to start with verse 12 and go through verse 17. And to the angel of the church in Pergamos write, these things say he who has the sharp two-edged sword. I know your works, and where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. And you hold fast to my name, and did not deny my faith, even in the days in which Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was killed among you where Satan dwells. Verse 14. But I have a few things against you, because you have there those who hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit sexual immorality. Thus you also have those who hold to the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate. Verse 16. Repent, or else I will come to you quickly, and I will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, I will give him of the hidden manna to eat, and I will give him a white stone, and on the stone a new name written, which no one knows, except him who receives it. As we've talked about in the past, everything about these churches is important. Christ specifically chose them for specific reasons that hold importance to what he's trying to portray to this church. They were real churches in real time, yes, but they also hold significance for us as believers even today. There's application not just for our church as a whole, but also for our church individually. So let's go to the name of the church. It's called the City of the Serpent. Pergamos is the feminine form of the name, and Pergamum, you'll hear both quoted, is the neuter form of the name. They're both used. One is plural and the other one is singular. Pergamos is located 48 miles north of Smyrna. Ephesus was the great political center, and we talked about that in the first letter. Smyrna, that we talked about last time, was the great commercial center. Pergamos is the great religious center. Prior to Alexander the Great, Pergamos was little more than a castle on top of a hill. But it was founded and ascribed by the Arcadian colonists under Telephus, who routed the Achaeans, on their land in Mysia to attack Troy. Now, just kind of progressing through their history, they had many wars back and forth. Antagonus, the Thracian kingdom with Lysimachus, they made an impregnable position that they used to be a bank. However, that guy there, well, the next one, Daniel. That guy, which I couldn't even try, he betrayed Lysimachus, Lysimachus was one of Alexander the Great's generals. When Alexander the Great died, they asked who should take over his kingdom. And he said it should go to the strong, which immediately meant that his generals took up arms and killed each other off. And then they ended up splitting up the kingdom into 4 different quadrants, and Lysimachus was one of them. And he took the area of what we call Turkey today, and where the churches in the letters to Revelation are. They had rulers, several different rulers, and finally they allied themselves with Rome. And they became extremely wealthy and a prosperous city. It was the official capital of Rome in the province of Asia, which when they say Asia, they're referring to Turkey, not the Asia that we think of, China and Burma and all those areas. They're talking about in the middle. And they were the Roman capital there for 2 centuries. But because they weren't anywhere close to trade routes, Ephesus became more powerful. Now, in this next one, you'll see here are the churches that received letters. And we went through Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos. And then we're going to go to these others coming up. But that just gives you an idea. If you go that way, that's Greece, and you have Turkey, and then down here is Israel and Lebanon and Syria over my shoulder, and then out of the picture. But that gives you at least an idea of where it's at. By the way, up here, this is Istanbul. That will come into play, I think, in the next letter, and a little bit into the end of this one. It's changed its name to Constantinople and several different times, and we'll talk about that. Geographically, Pergamos, go back real quick. Geographically, Pergamos is about 18 miles inland from the sea, okay, and about 48 miles north of Smyrna. So that kind of just gives you a picture. They're actually relatively close. I mean, 48 miles, that's from here to Lexington. 18 miles is less than here to Irvine or to Richmond. So it's relatively short distance. The present city of Pergamos has a population of 42,000, but in times past, in ancient times, it had a population of 200,000. So it was a massive city. It is said in mythology that Zeus was born here, and there is a massive altar that stood. Its foundation is 125 feet by 115 and over 50 feet high, and I'll have a picture of that in a little bit. It's also considered Satan's throne, and we'll talk about why. And Jesus mentioned it in his letter here. The caduceus was the official emblem of the city, and that was the god of healing. Does that look familiar? Right? It looks familiar for you medical people? Yeah. It originally started from a story that we know well in the Bible. Moses raising the serpent in the wilderness after the snakes had gone out and bitten people. Moses put the snake on the pole, on a bronze snake on a pole, and everybody looked at it, was healed. If they chose not to, they died. Jesus, in John chapter 3, we preached about it, 3 weeks ago, something like that, maybe 4. Jesus makes the only connection in the Bible whatsoever with this snake to himself. Nowhere else, Jews have no understanding of why Moses raised the serpent in the wilderness and why it brought healing. They don't get it because they don't see Christ. But Christ applied it to himself. Unless I be lifted up, I'll draw all men to me. Later on, after Moses used it, the people began to worship it. And during the time of Hezekiah, when he was cleansing the nation, he went and destroyed the caduceus because that thing of brass people were worshiping now. And so he destroyed it so they could no longer worship it. When you see 2 snakes on a pole, that's a bad thing. Okay? Sorry, ladies that work in the medical field. Does anybody remember the name Asclepius? He is the god of healing for the Greeks. He was the son of Apollo and the virgin Kronos. It was claimed that he had the power to avert death, and he was originally represented by Anatolians as a serpent, and that's where you get the Asclepius. The Greeks later depicted him, Asclepius, holding the caduceus in his hand as a 2-headed snake. Hermes is the god of commerce. That's the 2-headed snake. Moses didn't raise a 2-headed snake. And Asclepius didn't hold a 2-headed snake. But when they had Hermes hold it, they added a snake to it. Now, one snake on a pole that was for healing, averting death, having power over death. But when they decided to give it to the god of Hermes, they added 2 snakes. Isn't it interesting that when you look at the medical field, instead of having the actual snake on a pole for healing, what do they have? The god of commerce with 2 snakes. And that's what you see in the medical field, but that's actually from Hermes, the god of commerce, and not the god of healing. Health institutions before scientific medical practice prospered under Hippocrates. This was 8 centuries beforehand. And what Asclepius would do is he would take people, and you kind of think of like a psychiatrist. They'd lay them out on a bed, and they believed that if you dreamed deeply, it would bring healing to your bodies. And so they'd lay you out, and they would induce dreams or hypnotic states, and they, hallucinogens and all kinds of things. They would play music, and they would put you in warm baths to help. And that was some of the therapeutic ways that they healed people. But, like I said, now they raise the god of commerce, and, well, it's pretty fitting, at least for our American healthcare system. So let's go to the letter, after we've already read it, verse 12. And the angel to the church of Pergamos write. Now the word of the name Pergamos is actually a combination word. It's a compound word. The first in Greek means mixed, objectionable. It's where we get our perverted. It's the same root word. Then gamos is the Greek word for marriage. And so the combining of this word, the name is a perverted marriage. And we will see this played out really well in the city of Pergamos and in the time period of the church in which it's talking about. The title of Christ that he gives of himself here is, "These things say he who has the sharp two-edged sword." And what's the two-edged sword? Word of God. Yeah, the Word of God, which is our Bible. Anytime the church falls into perversion, into straying from God, the first place that it strays from is the Word of God. And if we want to purify the church, we come back to God and understand His Word better and align ourselves better to His Word, right? And so this is where they have failed, and what he says here is actually pretty scary. Verse 12, he says, "These things say he who has the sharp two-edged sword. I know your works, where you dwell, where Satan's throne is, and you hold fast to my name, and do not deny my faith, even in the days in which Antipas means against all, by the way, when my faithful martyr who was killed among you, where Satan dwells." Antipas was boiled alive for being a believer. And that took place in Pergamos, history tells us. Not exactly something, you want to see. But it says, notice here, where Satan dwells. There is a whole mentality in today's world, even denominations, that would say Satan is not a real person, not a real entity. He is the epitome of bad. He is what you don't want. He's the boogeyman that you warn people about, but he's not a real entity. But that's not what the Bible teaches at all. In fact, Jesus mentions it here that this is where Satan lives, in Pergamos. The Bible talks about Satan as being real. In fact, it gives us character qualities. His character is that he's a murderer, John chapter 8, verse 44. That he is a deceiver at his core, 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3, and many others. He is a liar, John chapter 8, verse 44 as well. You're the father of the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. He is also a sinner, 1 John chapter 3, verse 8. He who sins is of the devil, for the devil has sinned from the beginning. For this purpose the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil. Satan's domain is a vast demonic kingdom, 1 John chapter 5, verse 19. And we know that we are of God, and the whole world lies under the sway of the wicked one. The entire world system, and the deeper you begin to dig into our world system and the world powers that we have, you see a lot of demonic activity and a lot of demonic worship. Also, we see, and this is, how do I say that? We often get the mistaken idea that Satan has similar powers to Christ. But he does not. He cannot read your mind. He has no power to read your mind. He is not omnipresent. He has locality. He can only be at one place at one time. He isn't all-knowing. He doesn't know the future. He knows what the prophecies are of the future, but he has no recollection or no understanding of what's about to come and how bad hell really is, because he's not there yet. Okay? We have to understand that he is also a defeated foe. We get the idea that he's big and bad like Goliath, but we forget that, well, if we've overcome the world in our faith, and we have conquered the evil one, and he has no power over us. So, he is a real being, though. In the next slide here, we've got a picture of what the Satan's throne, or the altar of Zeus, looked like. And it was massive. Like I said, 115 foot wide, 105 foot long just at its foundation, 50 feet tall. It was an impressive work of building, if you want to call it that. It stood almost at the top of Pergamos' Acropolis, like where the hill came up. It stood almost at the very top of it, so you could see it from miles around. Titles that the Bible gives for Satan. He's the adversary. He's the accuser of the brethren. He's the god of this world. He's the prince of the power of the air. He's the spirit that now works in the children of disobedience. He's the enemy that sows tares. He's the wicked one. And if you want those verses, I can get those to you later. I did mention already that he's omnipresent. He's not omnipresent, excuse me. He is territorial. You find that in Daniel chapter 10, Revelation 9, and Revelation chapter 6. Now I want to take us through a little bit of history, and I'm only going to do a short account of it, and then at the end we're going to talk about it more. But Babylon, I want to get there now. I'll come back to it. There is a migration of paganism that goes throughout history that we need to know about because it applies to us very specifically. We will talk about that, but I was going to do part of it now and I'm not. We'll leave it there and then I'll explain them later. Verse 14, but I have a few things against you. Here's the concern that Christ gives. Because you have there those who hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit sexual immorality. Thus you also have those who hold of the doctrine of Nicolaitans, which I hate. Repent, or else I will come to you quickly, and I will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. He's not happy with this church. Folks, I'm going to come in and clean house. I'm going to open up my word and I'm going to start cutting people down, is the idea. Okay? He's not happy with his church because what they are doing is tragic. It's destruction of the light that he has put in that church. And I mean, it doesn't exist today. He wiped them out. They didn't listen. here's a few things. Do you remember the story? Let me see. I want to make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself. Okay, yeah. Do you remember the story of Balaam? Balaam was a magic man. He was a Gentile, a soothsayer. He was from Mesopotamia by the Euphrates River in Aram. And here's the passages where you find those. Balak, the king of Moab, wanted to destroy the children of Israel as they were approaching the promised land. So he hires Balaam, this soothsayer, to come and curse the children of Israel. And I'll be honest, it's a really scary story. Because obviously Balaam had power. But he wasn't a believer. But he was a believer. He believed in God, and he knew where he got his power from. And yet he was still doing miracle workings, and he was still disobeying God, and he had a rough life. I'll be honest. It's messed up. A little bit scary. Anyways, Balak, the king of Moab, hires Balaam to come and curse the children of Israel. In the process of doing that, he says, I can't go. So then Balak upped the price. So then he thought, well, maybe I can go. And God almost killed him. And God says, fine, if you are going to go, you can only say what I'm going to tell you to say. So Balaam gets on his donkey. His donkey stops, talks to him, tells him to turn around, that he's going to die. And then he sees an angel with a flaming sword in front of him. The donkey speaks to Balaam himself. God gives him the ability. It's a wild story. He progresses. Finally, as he's standing over top of this mountain, looking down at the cross of the children of Israel, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I can tell you about it later. Balaam saw the cross. It's cool. He looks down on the children of Israel, and instead of cursing them, as he opens his mouth, God puts in blessing, and he blesses the children of Israel. Balak is furious. So they go to another mountain, and they go to have another view of the children of Israel. And he goes and he stands up there, and he goes to curse them, and he gives out another blessing that was stronger than the first one. Balak is fit to be tied. But Balaam, being an evil man, and a greedy man at that, says, that's okay. I may not be able to curse them from my mouth, but I can tell you how you do it. All you got to do is get your lady friends that work at your temples and just go and have them set up their tents around the outside of the Israel camp. And then as the men from the camp decide to come out and worship with you, you'll have them. And God will be furious and God will wipe them out. And Balaam was exactly right. When the children of Israel did enter and destroy Moab, Balaam got it too. Because he disobeyed God and cursed God's people, even though it wasn't through his words, it was through his actions. Sad part is, the church is so infected with the sin of Balaam that the sores in the church are oozing pus. What Balaam did, and what God curses Balaam for doing throughout the scriptures, is all over the church. Especially in America. First of all, 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 15 talks about the way of Balaam. And essentially, Balaam made himself to be a hireling. The more money you had, the better the promise and blessing could be. So if you bless my ministry, I'll give all kinds of blessing to you. The problem was Balaam actually had the power to do it. And he did. Folks, well, listen to Mike Winger. He just, we were talking about that Wednesday night. That's not what the scripture's all about. This gospel is for the poor and rich alike. And it doesn't matter the amount that you got in your pocketbook. His salvation isn't bought and sold. Also, Jude verse 11 talks about the error of Balaam. And the error of Balaam was sacrificing eternal riches for temporal gain. As rich as he became, he only had a little while to use it. until the children of Israel came through and he bought the sword with everybody else in Moab. How many people in the church sacrifice eternal riches for the gain of their pocketbook? Here's one that's even closer to home. You won't like this one at all. How many people sacrifice eternal riches by not paying their tithes and robbing God? It's the error of Balaam. Also, Revelation chapter 2, verse 14 says the doctrine of Balaam. And Balaam's wisdom, if you want to call it that, was spiritual unchastity, being married with the world. Oh, just let your little churches be right next to the good people. And then as the good people begin to stray, they'll be accepting. How many times did the children of Israel fall away from the Lord because they were worshiping the other gods? And it all started with their temple priests and priestesses. You know what I'm talking about? The real big parties? Yeah. It happened over and over again. And you know what? Good grief. Just what? Last week, they had that men's conference. Mark Driscoll had to stand up in the middle of it and say this is the spirit of Jezebel, and then they kicked him off the stage. It was last week. How many people allow what the rest of the world is doing and accept it in as themselves? Worse than that, they put them in leadership in the churches. Can't do it, folks. God will wipe that light out. But they weren't all like that. There were definitely some. Give me a little bit of the world, give me a little bit of church, and I'm going to be a good guy. I'll make it, I'll be fine. I show up on Easter and Christmas, right? What drives me the craziest, I don't know if any of you have ever seen The Godfather, but one of the most moving parts for me in the movie, the first Godfather movie, is when the Don is being baptized into the Catholic Church. And he's repeating the priest, and I renounce sin, and I renounce the works of the devil, and every time he says I renounce, he has a hitman go and knock off one of the other mafia dons in the city. And it's exactly what we do in the church. We may not do it to that severity, but I renounce the works of the devil. I'm a believer. I'm a follower. And then we don't follow and we don't believe. Lord help us. But they all weren't like that. Verse 17, here's the encouragement. He who has an ear, a spiritual ear, let him hear what the Holy Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes. That means you don't flow with the rest of them, but you conquer. I will give some of the hidden manna to eat. I will give him a white stone, and on a stone a new name written which no one knows except him who receives it. Now, how many people, all right, yes, woo! What in the world does that mean? Lord, what are you talking about? Hidden manna? A white stone? Let's face it, if I'm going to serve the Lord, I want more than a white stone with my name on it. And then to give me a different name? What's going on there? What's he talking about? Well, first off, manna. Like I said before, if you don't understand what's said in Revelation, that's because you got to go back to your Old Testament. You got to go up through the rest of the Bible. Well, what was manna? Where's that little can? Oh no, I lost it. Oh, yes, it's over by the peanut butter. Go and hand everybody one of the little pieces of coriander. So, in the Old Testament, just hand everybody one. You can smell it, you can even eat it if you want, but it's mainly for a visual. Back in the Old Testament, in Exodus chapter 16, as the children of Israel are wandering around in the wilderness, that God gives them heavenly manna. That what the scripture describes it as is coriander seeds. And that's what he's passing out, is little seeds of coriander. That's what it looked like. Now you could crush it up and it tasted like honey and wafers, like we were talking about before service. I already gave him something. But they'd pick it up off the ground and they would grind it and they would bake it and they would, I'm sure, fry it. And they would probably do anything and everything they could think of to cook it, because there's only so much you can do with a seed like that. Now granted, you'd gather enough of them. You'd gather one for each day, and then on the day before the Sabbath, you'd gather enough, and it would last through the Sabbath, so you didn't have to work on the Sabbath. If you collected more than what you needed for your daily share, what did it do? It rotted, and then it gathered what afterwards? Did anybody listen to my Bible or my
worms?
What kind of worms? Total worms. All right. And if you don't know that one, heaven help you. I don't know how you couldn't with all my teaching. I love the total worm, but it would rot, and the worms would come out, and they would get crushed. They would die. They'd bleed all over everything. It was terrible. It was awful. The Bible in Psalm 78 talks about manna poetically. It mentions the food from heaven, the bread of the mighty. There it was. You were right. Psalm 78, verse 24. Psalm 105 talks about the bread from heaven, and what did Jesus say of himself? I am the bread of life. John chapter 6, verses 26 through 58. We know that passage well. But also, it says hidden manna. So it's more than just physical nourishment from bread. So what's he talking about? I mean, if we don't eat enough of it in heaven, are we going to die? No, there's no more death there. Are we going to get sick? No, there's no more sickness there. So what are they talking about? That in eternity, we will receive this hidden manna. I love this story. Because I was questioning in my mind, okay, Lord, what really are you talking about? And then we come to John chapter 4. John chapter 4, verse 30. Up until this point, the disciples have gone into a Samaritan city. Jesus is sitting down next to a well, and a Samaritan woman comes out, and Jesus starts talking to her. Tells her everything about her life. She goes crazy. She goes and tells everybody in the city. Just as she has gone and told everybody in the city about how sinful she was and that this guy knew it, here come the disciples back bringing food to Jesus. As they're coming back and they get to him, Jesus looks over their shoulder and starts seeing the entire town coming towards him, trying to find out who this prophet's all about, who this Messiah is. And this is what's said. Verse 30, then they, talking about the disciples, went out of the city and came to him. Excuse me. That was the people. In the meantime, his disciples urged him, saying, Rabbi, eat. But he said to them, I have food to eat which you do not know. Therefore the disciples said to one another, has anyone else brought him anything to eat? I mean, we were bringing the food. Somebody else bring the smorgasbord? Jesus said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Do you not say that there are still 4 months and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes, look at the fields, for they are already white with harvest. Boys, turn around and look, because here comes the sheaves. The people are coming out of the city right now. And he who reaps receives wages and gathers fruit for eternal life, that both he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together. Jesus was nourished by doing the will of his Father. He said, he who overcomes, I will give him hidden manna. It's not physical food. It is spiritual nourishment that doesn't fade away. It's lasting, eternal. I mean, it doesn't take me long after I eat some bread before I feel hungry again, right? And, I mean, eating little seeds like that, after 40 years, I guarantee you they were wanting something else, and they did, and boy, that was bad. They were complaining about it. I probably would have too. I'd have died with them, most likely. I like my variety in food. But after eating those little things, I'd get hungry, and it wouldn't take me long. But Jesus says here, no, I haven't had anything physical to eat. Oh, but I am full. I am nourished because I've done the will of my Father. When we overcome sin, when we are walking with the Lord, when we're doing His will, when we're doing what we know we're supposed to be doing, there is a fulfillment that happens there that is far beyond anything even the best of Big Macs could do for you. So that's the hidden manna. It is the manna from heaven that through the Spirit nourishes our soul, not simply our body. All right, but then he also says, a white stone with a new name. Now there's actually 3 different stories of what a white stone was in ancient times. One, if a person was going to be convicted or they were going to vote on something, they would go kind of how we would to a voting booth. It would be a box, and as you approached it, there'd be 2 stones. One black stone, guess what that one meant? No. And a white stone that meant yes. And so they would go by and they would pick up the yes or the no, the black or the white, and they would put it in the box. So he could be saying that we have a white stone that we're given. A yes. That sounds pretty good. I'd like a yes for eternity. Woohoo! That'd be good. But then there's another one. There's the white stone of innocence. If you were convicted of a crime, or if you were on trial, I should say, let's back up just a little bit. You were on trial. The judge says that your debt is wiped away, right? Tetelestai, as it were. They would give you a white stone. They would have written on it that you were paid, that you had it taken care of. And you would hold that stone with you, proving to anyone that came up and questioned that, no, I've paid my debt to society. It was a proof of innocence. To those that overcome, I will give them a proof of innocence. In fact, it talks about a white stone here, but it also talks about white raiment later on in the book of Revelation, right? The other one, the best way I know how to describe it is, I've got the golden ticket. If you've ever watched Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, they found that wonderful golden ticket and they were granted access into Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. It's the same idea. If a runner in the Greek games, the Olympic games, or other matches, of some sort, if they won, one of the things that they won, besides getting a victor's crown or riches, you would get a white stone. That white stone would give you access. It was the golden ticket to be able to make it to the parties that were going to be taking place that evening all around town, if you know what I mean. It would be, you approach the party and the bouncer says, wait a minute, I don't know who you are. And then he'd hold up that white stone and say, oh, well, come on in. You're an honored guest. And these are the idea. To him who overcomes, I will grant them access as a welcomed guest into eternity. And so those are the 3 ideas, and I think you can kind of see from them what it's talking about. But also, he says, with that white stone, you'll have a new name. God loves to give new names in the Bible. For example, Abram was exalted father. God changed his name to Abraham, the father of many nations. Sarai meant princess, and her name was changed to Sarah, the mother of many nations. And I'm sure if you remember in our Bible studies when we went through the pictograph Hebrew, what God added to their name was his Holy Spirit. The Hey that we see as an H in Sarah and Abraham is actually the Spirit of God that he placed in their name. It's a beautiful thing. Jacob, remember, he was heel grasper. He was supplanter. Well, God changed his name to Israel. God prevails. That's an upgrade, isn't it? You remember the story of Ben-Ammi. As Rachel is dying, giving birth to her son, she looks at him and she says, he is going to be Ben-Ammi, son of my sorrow. But then Jacob, or Israel, depending on how you want to translate it, which name you want to use, said, oh no, his son's not going to be my son of sorrow. His name's going to be Benjamin, son of my right hand. That's an upgrade. Hey, sorrow, come here. No. Hey, right hand, come here. It's an upgrade. Solomon, his name meant peace. But God himself changed Solomon's name. We only have it recorded in one verse. But God changed the name of Solomon to Jedediah, which means loved by Jehovah. And then, of course, Jesus changed Simon's name from hearing to the rock, which was
Dwayne Johnson.
Yeah. Not Dwayne Johnson, no.
Yes. Are you
Peter.
sure?
He changed his name to Peter. I love this. Can I tell you why? I was named Daniel. It's a good Bible name, right? Good Bible name. I grew up in I needed it, but it was a very structured, strict, biblical environment. And for many years of my Christian walk, I lived my name out. My name means God is my judge. And I always felt like I had to tiptoe everywhere I went because God was waiting to play whack-a-mole with Dan. As soon as I got my head up, pow. And I lived that way for years. Until I realized my salvation isn't about my works. It's about God's grace on my life. One of these days when I get to eternity, He has a new name for me. It's not that He's my judge. I don't know what that name's going to be, but I can't wait to see what it's going to be. He's got a new name for me. And He has a new name for you. And it says here that it's going, I'll just read it. A new name written, which no one knows except him who receives it. What I believe is that the Holy Spirit, who has been working on my life throughout my life, is going to give me a name that nobody else gets. But it's going to be the inside joke between me and Him. And it's going to be personal. Where He brought me. You know that old cartoon talking about footprints in the sand? And saying, this is where I carried you. And then he asks, well, what about those two long lines there? He says, well, that's where I had to drag you. I think the inside joke there is with my name. Is going to be, yeah, Dan, I carried you here. You walked with me here. I had to drag you here. But I'm not your judge anymore. And I can't wait to see what that's going to be all about. He has a new name for us. The application is to all the churches. But it also matches the personal application. Spiritual compromise is a dangerous thing. How many of you, when you let Satan in the door, have had success defeating him in temptation once you've let him in the door? How many? Raised hands. Let me put my hand out real quick. The minute, just a little temptation, right? Just a little lie, or just a little thief, or, it's not much, it's just a little bit. Just a little thing. If you let him get his foot in the door, he's not just happy with his foot in the door. No, he wants to come in and take the couch. We have to be oh so careful. We have to be oh so careful that we do not compromise with what the world system has. The world system is his. It will destroy us spiritually. It will bring us down. We will be walking in sin as quick as he can possibly get us if we allow him to get his foot in the door. In our church, in our own lives. And we need to be on guard for it. Promise to the overcomer. For Ephesus, it was the overcomers would eat of the tree of life. In Smyrna, it was that they would not be hurt by the second death. Great thing to know when you're a church of persecution. Pergamos, that they would receive hidden manna, white stone, and a new name. Who are the overcomers? 1 John chapter 5, verse 4. John explains it to us. For whoever is born of God overcomes the world. And this is the victory that overcomes the world, our faith. Who is he who overcomes the world but he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God? So now I want to talk about that biblical history. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Now I want to talk about that history that I had mentioned before. Nimrod organized, started, founded paganism in the world in Babylon. Okay? Tammuz was born to Nimrod and Semiramis. It's associated with the sun god. He dies at the winter solstice on December 22nd and is resurrected as the days begin to get longer. Thus, they celebrate the burning of a Yule log in paganism, pagan Babylon. In Chaldean, the Yule log was an infant. And it was replaced the next morning by a trimmed tree. And if you want to feel convicted, Jeremiah chapter 10, verses 1 through 5. Also, in their belief, they talked about mistletoe. We know that. You're supposed to kiss underneath it, right? Well, to them, it meant fertility. And there's a wassail as well. I'm not going to go into all those details, but you get the idea that some of these things are pagan. That's where their roots are. Nimrod originally founded the Babylonian religion. And here's the stories. Is Ashtoreth, is that a Babylonian name? No, it's not. Is Isis? No. Is Aphrodite or Venus? No. These are all different religions. Or at least that's what they would have you think. But when you go to their actual stories, no, they're all the same. They just have different branding. They're virtually identical to Phaethon and or Asclepius, eventually developing into worship of his widow, whose name is Semiramis, I'll get it out yet, and his posthumous son. So, in Babylon, Tammuz and Semiramis, they have a son, dies, resurrected. If you go to the Phoenician religion, pagan religion, it's Tammuz and Ashtoreth. If you go to the Egyptian religion, it's the same story with Horus and Isis. When you go to Greece, it's Eros and Aphrodite. And when you go to Rome, it's Cupid and Venus. It's the same story. They just have different names. And I'll explain to you why. When Cyrus conquered Babylon, the Babylonian priesthood had to leave. They were powerful. They were well mixed in the nation, in the political part of the nation, so they had to flee to save their lives. So guess where they went? They went to a town called Pergamos, the place we're talking about tonight. And they set up shop there. As you watch history, you see the flow going from Babylon to Greece, eventually to Rome. It shifted into Rome and adopted Latin labels, just as it did adopted Greek, and it formed the foundation of pagan Rome, but it's the same stories, the same priesthood, just several generations down. And for a prime example, does that guy look familiar?
No.
Not okay, just thought I'd ask. Do I need to say more?
Yeah.
Looks pretty similar, doesn't it? You know who that one is?
Aquaman?
Nope. That's Dagon. Remember that whole story about Dagon falling in the temple and breaking his hands up? His helmet or his headdress looks really similar, doesn't it? We'll just leave it there. This is by G.H. Pember. When Cyrus conquered Babylon, they founded a new center at Pergamos, and that king became named as Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of the pagan system religion. Subsequent transfer of the cult from Pergamos to Rome, with the appointment of successive Caesars to be high priest. In 378 AD, Damascus, the bishop of Rome, completed the absorption of the Babylonianism religion into the Roman Catholic Church, and that is written by Alexander Hislop and G.H. Pember. A brief history. Rome was founded in 753 AD, or BC, excuse me. From 343 to 272, if I can read it, they took over Italy. In 264 to 146 BC, they conquered Carthage. From 215 to 146, they conquered Greece and Asia Minor. 133 to 31 BC, they conquered Spain, Gaul, Britain, and the Teutons. 63 BC, they conquered Judea. In its zenith, it spanned from the Atlantic Ocean to the Euphrates River and from the North Sea to the African desert, and they had a population of 120 million people. Oh, boy, I don't have time for all of this. We'll go through it really quickly. So, after the Roman Caesars, you had Decius, who persecuted Christians. You had Valerian. He was the one that killed the Origen, who was a founding father in the church. Glennaeus, he favored Christians, wasn't as harsh on them. Aurelian, but then the worst of the worst, from 284 to 305 AD, was a man named Diocletian, and he was a Caesar. He did everything to literally genocide all Christians in the most horrific ways possible. In 312 AD, after Diocletian is gone, Constantine goes to fight against other armies to take control. He's in a battle at the bridge, what's the name of it? Milvian Bridge. And he sees a sign in the sky. And the inscription said, "In this sign thou shalt conquer." And he saw what he believed to be a cross in the sky. He went on to win that battle of the Milvian Bridge and converted to Christianity subsequently. He gets a bad rap. Constantine gets a bad rap. Many say, of one particular persuasion denomination, that he just filtered in and made everything pagan illegal and made everything Christian legal and forced Christianity on everyone. He didn't do that. Now, his successors, they most definitely did, and they're to blame. But what he did was he said, okay, we're going to stop beating up the Christians. 325, he did the Edict of Toleration and established religious freedom. Up until this point, if you were a Christian, you were pretty much guilty before you ever walked into court. And now you had equal sitting in court. He made Christian ministers, exempt from taxes, and issued a general exhortation to all of the subjects to become Christians. He encouraged it. He moved the capital from the Byzantine, I'm really having trouble reading tonight. He changed the name from the Byzantine Empire to make it called Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, same town. And that was in 330. But he also ceased the gladiatorial fights. He reduced the killing of unwanted children. He abolished crucifixion in forms of execution. He repealed the persecution edicts of Diocletian, his predecessor, assumed the headship of the church, advanced Christianity to high offices, declared Sunday a day of worship, forbid work on Sunday, reduced slavery. All of these things, those sound pretty good, don't you? If everybody's dying and then you get this, it sounds great. Except, what's the problem with that? If ministers are now exempt from taxes, wonder who they're going to pick. Wonder who's going to take those roles. The same guys that took the roles when they left Babylon and went to Pergamos. And then when they went from Pergamos to Rome, and now they can't be pagan anymore, and there's great benefits for being Christians, well, we'll just join up. And what it did, and I truly believe unintentionally, I really think that Constantine did not intend for it to happen. But what it did was just filtered paganism right straight through Christianity. And what Diocletian and all of the Caesars before him could not accomplish by killing the Christians off, Constantine's followers did by the same thing that Balaam did. Don't kill them off. Don't curse them. Just let them follow along with paganism. Take a little bit of the world, take a little bit of Jesus, and we'll all be doing great. And it seriously hurt the church. Julian, called the apostate, came after Constantine, and he tried to restore paganism. And you can imagine him appointing new church leaders. Probably didn't help the church any. But then Jovian, he reestablished the Christian religion. And it was these guys that they did a whole lot more hurt to the church than they did to help. They made Christianity a state religion. They forced conversions to fill the churches with regenerated people. They made the church, they gave it an ambition to rule, to be heathen. And he mentioned the Nicolaitans here, but it's the rule of the priesthood over the people. In Rome, that was exactly it. Heathenism became Christianized. Pagan temples became Christian churches. Heathen festivals were converted to Christian ones. Pagan priests became Christian ones. Most of the changes were just in the name, not in practice. And as I mentioned, what persecution couldn't accomplish, they did with the work of Balaam. Here's the stages of history that we've been talking about. We've moved through the apostolic period. We moved through the greatest persecution during the church age up until that point. And then now we're here with the married church, the church that married the world. And we will move next time into Thyatira. If you go down just a little bit further, maybe one more. Dr. James Merritt said this: the battle today is not good versus evil, but the battle is truth versus error. The church at Pergamos were compromising truth for unity. Compromise brings comfort. Conviction brings conflict. Christianity is not for the faint of heart. It is better to be divided by truth than to be united by error. Our greatest battle in the church today is for truth. We are moving into a time of the greatest deception this world has ever known. And we're right at the battle lines, the front of the battle. We need to be careful what we accept as truth. We need to be careful about what we accept as the church. We cannot accept sin. It's bothered some people on occasion, but even in our church, there's been people that have been able to, they were very talented people, but I won't have them stand on the stage because they're living in a way that is openly sinful. Talented or not, you can't be led by the Spirit if you're not walking in the Spirit. And we need to be careful not to compromise. Churches around us have. There's some churches inside Richmond right now that are growing gangbusters. But if you see who's leading them and what's being said from the pulpits and in the worship services, folks, that's not being led by the Spirit. And I don't want to put other people down. That's not my focus tonight, but it's the application of what we're talking about tonight. We need to be careful with what the Word of God says and walk in all of the light that we have.
Did they not move that throne at Pergamos to Germany back in the 20s.
I'm not sure. I don't know that story. Did they really? I'll have to look that up. I've never heard that. That's interesting. I hadn't heard that. All right. Promise to the overcomer once more to eat of the tree of life, to not be hurt by the second death. Hidden manna, a white stone, and a new name. And then to the organization of each letter, you'll see here. Each one has a name that's important. Each one has a title that's meaningful. Each one is given praise. Each one is given concern, except not this one. Each one is given an exhortation. Then you have the promise to the overcomer. And in the middle of that, for here, it says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. All of them are organized. And by the time we get down to the end here, you'll see some pretty glaring warnings for the church. All right, let's pray. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. It really does mean the world to me that you're getting a blessing out of it. If this video was a blessing, make sure to hit that thumbs up button for me. That way other people can find it as well. Here in the link section, you'll find playlists and new videos that we put out. We try to do 2 or 3 a week. You can also subscribe to the channel by pressing on my face and then hitting the bell icon, and that will alert you to new videos. May God richly bless you.